Arunjay Katakam. Wonderful talking with Arunjay. Fascinating story, where he's been, where he is now. Young child, grew up in India, middle class, got the opportunity to visit the Caribbean, stayed there for a month, decided to live there for 2 years there in Trinidad, and at a young age decided he wanted to be a millionaire. Didn't know why. So he spent a lot of time chasing it and working for a big firm for banking. And a major shift happened when a friend told him that involves his grandmother's teeth. It's the opening question I have for him. It's fascinating. But now he devotes his time to helping others. He has an incubator where he has startups that he works with. He's now in the United Kingdom, and just refreshing perspective on the inequality of poverty and how that should be balanced, and concepts that I never heard of before. Really cool concepts, like he's a recovering wealth chaser. Never heard that before. Inclusive economics. Just a fascinating conversation with Arunjay. Thank you for listening and watching. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because of working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How'd I lose the weight? Just one word: discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission: how do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision: growth through learning from others. To you. Thanks for your time today, Arunjay Katakam. How did your grandmother's teeth play a role in the shift of your life?
So it was. So it's actually, firstly, Joey, thank you so much for having me. I really, appreciate it and looking forward to our conversation. And I want to say that's just the story a friend told me. That I needed to be so greedy that I would be willing to knock out my grandma's teeth and melt the gold filling. And if I had that level of greed, investment banking would be for me.
Mm.
And that was the turning point for me, realizing actually, I'm on the wrong path here, and then kind of shifting from investment banking to financial inclusion.
In this fast-paced MSP landscape, how do you stay ahead? Introducing MSPinfluencer.com, your ultimate hub for MSP news, insights, and community connection, powered by Forza Dash. More than 75,000 MSPs subscribe to our MSP Influencer Pulse weekly newsletter, staying informed and ahead of industry trends. Tune in to emerging podcasts from Joey Pinz and leading MSP voices, offering essential tips, powerful insights, and success stories. Explore our multi-authored blogs, crafted specifically for MSP leaders, delivering fresh perspectives and actionable strategies. Celebrate excellence with the industry-leading Forza Dash MSP Influencer Awards, recognizing innovation, leadership, and impact in the MSP community. Join thousands of MSP professionals who trust MSPinfluencer.com to grow their business and expand their networks. MSPinfluencer.com, where today's MSP leaders connect, collaborate, and conquer, all powered by the Forza Dash platform, helping MSP vendors work effectively with MSPs and helping MSPs grow. So at a young age, excuse me, Arunjay, beg your pardon. You're in India. You get invited to go to, through your father, I believe, you get invited to go to Trinidad and Tobago. You loved it so much you actually made a move there.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. So my father's classmate, he's from Trinidad. He lives there. He'd invited me, and India was playing cricket at the time, touring the Caribbean, and I was like huge cricket fan at the time. So it was just a great opportunity. So I went and I spent a month there, and I loved it so much that I decided to go back. And then I lived there for 2 years, working at EY at the time. And then I, subsequently came to the UK and spent 3 more years with EY. And then for a period of time, I was in and out of Trinidad. I was building a couple of startups, and I just loved the place. It so happened I haven't been back now since 2013, but
Oh, wow.
been really itching to go back. I have so many friends there, and I kind of almost went before the pandemic, then the pandemic, so here we are,
So you mentioned you were at EY, which is, of course, Ernst& and Young,
yeah.
and you determined at a young age that you wanted to be a millionaire. You didn't really have a goal in mind or what you wanted to do with it, just you wanted millions, correct?
Absolutely. I can remember from age 11, this was, and the thing is, I don't know, where it came from really, other than society, because my parents weren't like that. They would, it was, not at all their values or their kind of ambition. In fact, they're done the opposite, which subsequently has rubbed off on me. It's like, as a teenager thinking, why would my father work harder? Why
Mm.
he could earn so much more money, but he's not. And then, a decade or so, it started to, oh, actually, maybe he has the right kind of balance and the right mindset. And then it took me another decade or so to actually, implement it, because it's not easy, right? Like, we're so used to kind of being driven, being ambitious, and for a long time in life, success was measured by two metrics: money and title.
Hmm. So you go into investment banking, but then this whole shift happens when you just get the realization of your grandmother's teeth. It's just not for you. It's not your personality. It's not what you're willing to do. You wanted that goal, but it's just you don't those ways to get there wasn't for you.
Absolutely. And the thing though is, after that shift, I still wanted the millions. I just
Hmm.
wanted to get it in a nicer way. And that was a fascinating period, because between 2010 and 2020, I had 6 occasions where I almost made those millions.
Hmm.
And each time, something or the other. And my grandma used to say that you should be careful of the slip between the cup and the lip. And it
Mm.
kind of like always stayed with me. And the thing is, I'm now glad it didn't happen, because now I'm in a much better place. And I think I can truly share my happiness with others, not having made the millions.
Mm.
Because if I had made the millions, we would say, yeah, easy for you to say, you made your
Mm.
millions. So,
Mm.
you know, and my big realization came through COVID. And that's when I shed kind of this idea of making millions. Because, firstly, I actually questioned myself, why do I want to make it? 11-year
Mm.
old me wanted it. But, you know, 30 years later, do I still want that? And the answer was actually not really. And secondly, when I said, okay, if I did make it, what would I do with that money? I would do a lot of good. I know that. And so I decided I'm just going to do that. There's enough money in the world. There are other people who have made it, who want to give back. And I don't have to make it to give back. And then also, who knows how much longer it was going to take for me to make it? Maybe another
Mm.
10 years, 20 years, maybe never. And, so not only it kind of changed my mindset, but it's changed what I do with my time and my life and everything.
I never heard the term before, researching you a little bit, recovering wealth chaser.
Yeah, well, it is um, how I think about it, because,
Mm.
when you spend 30 years of your life chasing millions, you have to, it takes some unwinding, from there. And our society is so entrenched with this concept.
Hmm. Yeah, they really, really are. And so Now you ultimately discovered in yourself that you actually want to help people. You thought that you'd make the money to help people, but now you can help people without that money. And we can kind of move on to, challenging global poverty, which you saw in India, which you saw with COVID. Talk to me about that, Arunjay.
Yeah, I think, from a very young age, this just really struck with me when I saw poverty in India. And this was even before, like age 11. I think it goes back to those very early years. And then through my early teens, when I started to understand it, I just could not accept that the narrative at the time, which might still be the case is that these people are lazy, they don't want to work, all of these kind of things. So it's like, oh, you shouldn't give them money because you're just encouraging them to continue begging.
Hmm.
And it really didn't sit right. It's like, no, I mean, why would people do this? This is a terrible life, like, this is not what people would want to do with their time. And through my work in financial inclusion and realizing the economic exclusion that prevails and exists, and it's right from the bottom all the way to near the top. It's only kind of the top 10-15% of the world that are properly economically included. The rest are left behind. And the people on the streets, they're not there by choice.
Hmm.
They are there as a failing of society, as a failing of of the systems, economic systems. And as good as capitalism is, it hasn't solved for that. And
Hmm.
it's solved for many lots of things, and a lot of poverty has been eradicated systematically over the last few decades. But there's still this problem. And now, in fact, it's getting worse because the we're coming up to points where, with the systems where the rich are just getting so much richer.
Hmm.
Wealth and income inequality has been increasing, like, massively. So it started 40 years ago, and now, if you look at it as a, kind of a graph, the jaw of the alligator is like wide open,
Hmm.
and just continuing that way. Uh, we're finding billionaires who have more money for their great 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 grandchildren who still don't want to pay tax,
Hmm.
who still, in the UK, so there's like something like 10,000 millionaires who left last year. So they say one every 45 minutes,
Wow.
and because they don't want to pay the tax. And there were two very high profile billionaires, James Dyson being one and Jim Radcliffe the other. They were the richest in the UK, multi billions, who left the UK, one to Singapore and the other to Monaco. I'm like, you have so much wealth,
Hmm.
and you need to run away from, your country of birth
Hmm.
so that you can save some of this money. It makes no sense.
Hmm.
But these are the choices people are making. And so, against that backdrop, we had many years when, the middle class was progressing and there was mobility between generations. We now have a situation where kids are worse off than their parents. And that's not going to go down well.
Hmm.
And it's just, yeah, it's worrying in that something's going to have to change.
This is what you mean when you talk about inclusive economics.
Yeah, so, yeah, it's the opposite, right? So exclusive economics is like the economics only working for a few, which
Hmm.
is what it is at the moment. So if you're super rich, um, and it works. You have assets; those assets pay you dividends. You're doing well. Everything's working for you. But if you're not in that and you're employed, you're just getting poorer. So that's one part of the problem. The other thing is that what's happening, and has happened a lot, is the ability of cooperations, like large companies and employers in general, being able to squeeze more out of the workers. So the gig economy is a great example where um, the gig worker is rather unfairly remunerated, but the power is with the company.
Hmm.
So I call it algorithmic dehumanization,
Hmm.
because basically they do not employ the taxi driver in the case of Uber, or the right, the kind of the delivery guy in the case of the different delivery services. They call them partners, but
Hmm.
not so much as a single share in the company. And so when Uber, I don't know, now it's like well over 100 billion in market cap. All of that wealth is, with the minority of people in Uber, the leadership, the like the top, and the investors and all of those, and the 3 million Uber drivers who created all that wealth have nothing to show for it. Like,
Hmm.
and at a moment's notice they're out of work, because as much as they are so-called entrepreneurs driving their taxis, the algorithm decides when they get the next gig.
Hmm.
And the algorithms are designed to, hook you. So there's, if you talk to Uber drivers, they tell you they have to accept these challenges and do so many trips and so many days, and like, so they gamify it.
Hmm.
And so you're at the behest of the algorithm
Hmm.
in order to, kind of make a living. And any Uber driver you ask who's been on that platform, and it's not, I'm just using Uber as an example, but it's the same for anyone, whether it's Lyft or Grab or whatever, they all were better off before.
Hmm.
And so as time progresses, they have to work longer hours to earn the same money, because you know, there's little or no cost to these ride hailing platforms to add more people, more drivers to the platform, because it doesn't cost them anything,
Hmm.
other than the onboarding, but that's minimal. And they're not paying them a fee. So unless they're, doing the ride. And this is just one example, but you're seeing it everywhere. And so people who have less job security, more volatility, all of this, and they're being like,
Exploited.
basically this erosion that's happening
Hmm.
for this social economic fabric. And you can't even, question it in most cases, because it's the computer, the system. There's no human you can go and talk to. The bosses, they're like completely out of reach.
So they would say, of course, if you steel man this argument, Arunjay, they would say, Uber and those would say, well, look, we're allowing the flexibility. The single mother who has to bring the kids to school can now work 2 or 3 hours while the child is at school. It's very flexible. You work with what you earn with what you work. And so we allow that there. So that would be their argument. We're providing income for these people who need the flexibility, right? That would be their argument. To that you say what?
Yeah, I mean, look, I speak to every Uber driver or ride-hailing driver I travel with, and over time, that's quite a lot. So
Yeah.
it is anecdotal, but I have, in vast majority of the cases, those drivers are doing it full time.
Hmm.
They're not doing it for a couple hours here and there.
I
This is
see.
this is their job, and that's the whole kind of industry is set up in that way to employ you full time, but without a guaranteed wage.
Hmm.
And so, yes, there is some flexibility. There is the fact that, and some drivers have told me, like, I don't have a boss. I don't have someone saying, why are you not
Right.
working now? So there is that shift. Um, but it's still heavily lopsided in terms
Mm.
of who is reaping the rewards. Uber would not be Uber without these drivers.
Mm.
We're not yet at automated, vehicles that are driven without driverless. Oh, we'll get there, and then these guys will be toast completely. But even now, they're being, extracted from, and I think this is where, like, as society, we've just turned a blind eye to these things.
Mm.
And there's this whole concept of individualism and looking after our own self-interest and our own thing, that we don't really care about anybody else.
Yeah, and of course they would. How about the issue of just competition, Arunjay? So there's many of those providers. So hopefully they would pay the drivers, the contractors a little bit more to come over to their platform. Do we see that happening at all? I don't know much about this.
Yeah, so in some markets a little bit, but you see, the thing is, the network effects is the game here. So it's all about the network. And so it's two sides to the network. One is how many drivers you have and how many riders you have, because the more drivers you have, the more riders you get, because then they can get it in 2 minutes rather than five.
Mm.
So even new entrants, I mean, it's almost impossible now to enter the market because the existing players are so entrenched.
Saturated, yeah.
Yeah. So then they're all, at some level, they find a minimum. Okay, we're going to pay X, and we're not going to compete because more than that, we're just giving away shareholder value.
Mm. Mm.
That sort of thing. In China, Uber is competing with Didi very heavily, and then the investors just decided, like, look, we need to cut our losses here, and they sold the
Oh,
Uber
wow.
stake. They sold it to Didi, and for some exchange in shares and whatnot. They say, okay, well, we're not going to be able to beat you, but competing against you is hurting both of us, so let's join forces.
Hmm. You created an inclusive action lab with like a moonshot mission. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that?
Yeah. So because I've been really entrepreneurial, and I've built a number of businesses, and that was kind of my what gets me out of bed. And so I was like, well, I still really want to work in the startup space, but I also don't want to do it the way that startups are done.
Hmm.
So the Inclusive Action Lab is really a nonprofit startup, and it's incubating. So we've got two nonprofits coming out of them. One is called the Pass Alliance, and the other is Thrive Now. And the Pass Alliance is essentially an alliance of financial service providers to create an addressing system where you can pay anyone like you do on Venmo,
Hmm.
but anyone globally. They don't Today, they have to be on Venmo for you to pay them, but you should be able to just use their phone number or the email, like PayPal, for example, and pay them anywhere in the world. So that's a one project, and the other one is looking at how we can kind of redesign education, because a lot of the problems are grounded, like schools are designed, really the 9 to 5 job comes out of the school, like from such a young age.
Hmm.
You like, go to school, come back, homework, it's like you get into the rhythm of, and then it's like, okay, now go to work,
Hmm.
do the same thing. I think it was NASA who said that at 5 years old, 98% are geniuses, and by 15 or something, it's like 2% are geniuses. Like
Uh,
the school system just takes away.
Squashes
Uh,
it.
so the two problems with the education system: one is compliance. Wear this uniform, be on time, do this in class, do that. Detention if you don't. So compliance is a big, big thing, and to make you comply with arbitrary rules for the most in the most case in most cases. And the second is attainment. It's all about the SATs and the GPAs and this and that, all these scores.
Hmm.
So But I mean, in a world of AI, this is really, I mean, it's not been fit for purpose for a few decades now, but these things are hard to change. But I think the game is absolutely up with, after ChatGPT came in. I just need to know how to use all this to create value. I don't need to know all this, like it's such a seismic shift.
You mentioned about the pay system, the zero free model
Yeah.
for customer payment. Why is it so crucial, you think?
Yeah. So, if you use WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, or iMessage, or any of these instant messaging services, when they came on in the beginning, they they were free. They are still are free, but that being free was critical to the adoption. If WhatsApp, it was like 50 cents to send a message before, and still is if you don't use instant messaging service. If you send an international SMS, it's like 50 cents.
I didn't know that. Oh, wow.
And if WhatsApp said, look, I'll charge you 0.05 cents, and so that is 100 times cheaper, WhatsApp still would not be what it is today.
Mhm.
Because if we had to pay even fractions of a cent for the messages we were sending, you know, we would not use it in the same way. And this shift in that WhatsApp and other instant messages created, and the streaming music industry and the Netflix industry, you can see it's all moved from pay per view, pay per click, pay per use to an all you can eat buffet model. You pay a
Mm.
subscription, and you know or you just listen to the ads or whatever, but it's all about removing the friction from the customer side and being able to um, you know consume the content as you wish. And the same thing really is applicable to financial services, because the one thing that is really expensive is not your luxury handbags and things like that. It's expensive to be poor.
Mm.
The poorest people pay the most in financial fees, and we need to change that.
Hmm. It's expensive to be poor. It's expensive to be unhealthy, right?
Absolutely.
Because the bad food, the high caloric food, salt, fat food is very inexpensive and highly accessible.
Exactly. Yep. So it all, you can see how all of these things are connected, and it's all
Mm.
connected to the economic system. Why are these things, there's some, like in the US, particularly in the 60s, because sugar became expensive, they created the sweetener from corn syrup.
That's
I
right.
forget what it's called now, but it's in
Fructose corn syrup.
yeah, that's it,
High
fructose,
fructose.
and it's in everything, and it
Everything.
is so bad. But it's all based on profit seeking. And so the thing is now, if you want to eat healthy, if you want to go to a Whole Foods and buy the more expensive organic thing, like you're paying 2, 3 times the price.
Mm.
And how many people can truly afford to do that? It again, it's a very small subset. And so they, further exclusion. And then the poverty trap kind of continues, because even if you manage to, there's a statistic that 30% of people who come out of poverty every year go back into poverty because of a health shock,
Mm.
some illness, something, but and then they have to pay for it, and then that's it. Whatever they saved got like gone.
Hey, Joey Pinz here. Want to take your podcast experience to the next level? I'm excited to invite you to become a YouTube member. It's the absolute best way to support the channel and enhance your connection. Join our amazing community and unlock the incredible perks, custom loyalty badges, exclusive emojis, and priority comment replies. Your voice will always stand out. Be the first to watch new videos with early access. receive special membership shoutouts, and get exclusive behind the scenes photos and updates. Dive into content available only to our members, special videos, deep dives, and insider perspectives. Engage directly with me. Suggest podcast topics you want to hear, and even get personalized video shoutouts. Hit the join button right now and become part of something special. Let's build this amazing community together. I can't wait to welcome you as a new member. Join the Joey Pinz family today. You talk about abundance mindset. What's the difference between that and a scarcity one?
Yeah, so the scarcity one is what I had before in terms of accumulation, and so in fact, I mean, wanting to make millions alone is not a bad thing per se, but the way
Mm,
you go about it in terms of scarcity, which is the vast majority of how we all, kind of by default, is this sense of lack,
hmm,
and so we want something we don't have. But in the way the scarcity mindset shows up in is really um, manifests itself in different ways in how we interact with society. Now, I know y'all have a big tipping culture, for example, but there's some stingy people who just wouldn't tip no matter how much money they have,
mm,
like.
mm, mm,
And so that's because there's in that scarcity mindset. They're like, oh, if I give like, I don't want to part with this. I want to just accumulate, 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 and that's just what I've realized, is that's really unhealthy. And I did that for years, so I know it well. Um, you would quarrel about some charge, something that happened, came to you, some fee, some this, some that, and it's like, always, no, it's not about the money, it's about the principle. I realized that was just like a way of telling yourself, making yourself
really.
feel better. It's always about the money. Like, why would you bother to spend your time and energy, or and the thing is, now I have what I call an idiot fund, which is for the mistakes I make, and I just write it
Mm,
off to that fund, whether it's a parking ticket or somebody I got overcharged here or there, and I just move on. I'm not beating myself up for having made that mistake. Neither am I trying to fight with some customer service representative to give me some compensation for something. And it just frees me up to think about, you know, my work, what and like the quality of my life is has kind of really improved in so many ways, because I don't have to kind of like think about it in this transactional way.
hmm. Arunjay, you wrote a book, Generation Hope. What do you want the reader to come away with when reading your book?
I think I see two things. So one is this rise in consciousness.
Mm,
We are more conscious today than ever before. And, we I think that's, I mean, this is not, blanket or universally, but there's this movement of consciousness that's happening. And so I think that gives me hope. And the second part of this is that we have agency. This is the most important thing, because so often we just think we are powerless, but there's nothing further from that truth.
hmm,
If we're lucky to live in a democratic country, we get to vote every 4 or 5 years. But the reality is that we're voting every day,
mm,
multiple times a day, with our money and with our attention.
mm,
And this gives us the power to make change. Now, like, veganism is one example where 20 years ago didn't really exist.
mm,
And today in most restaurants you're going to have a vegan option. It's not because some government said you should be vegan. it's not because corporations said you should be vegan or any religious leader said you should be vegan. It's a movement by people,
Hmm.
one person at a time deciding, I want to be a vegan. And then the industry responded, the restaurants responded, the supermarket, like everybody responded to the demand of the people. And I think that's the power of our agency.
Hmm. Did you have this book in you for a long time and it just came out, or you got inspiration? What was the process of writing the book?
Yeah, I was really lucky. Actually, I wrote my first book in 2019, which is The Power of Micro Money Transfer, and was to do with making money move free. And that one was really in me. I had worked in the space for over a decade at the time, and I had the knowledge. So it was a brain dump. And I was, fortunate because that really taught me. And I'd learned to write because I was writing reports before that, but this really taught me how to write a book. And then when the pandemic happened in May of 2020, I realized that my whole industry, even though it had added 500 million people to bank accounts, those accounts were empty.
Hmm.
And another 3.5 billion people, so half the world's population, also had empty bank accounts because
Hmm.
these people were all living paycheck to paycheck.
Wow.
And when lockdown happened and the paychecks dried up, there was no money. And that was the realization to me that financial inclusion is good. We need it. But more than that, we also need economic inclusion. We need to make sure people, are kind of remunerated equitably and like have some money to fall back on and all these things. And the usual narrative is like, oh, they spend too much, they don't save, all of this thing. But the main problem is that it's like you're it's all rigged against you, like that's the
Hmm.
bigger thing here. You know it's very easy to put the narrative on the individuals and say they're spendthrift, or this or that, they're lazy, or the like so many ways to shift the problem. But the problem really lies in the system and the way it distributes wealth.
Hmm.
And so that was the journey to writing Generation Hope, and it took me 3 years to do it because
Wow.
I mean I'm not an economist. I like was really tussling with this problem, but I had to learn a lot. I think I read about 20 books
Hmm.
in the process, just trying to understand how things worked and how like fill gaps in my head. So for me, it turned out to be an amazing vehicle to do some really cool research, which I would have otherwise not done
Hmm.
if I wasn't writing the book. So yeah, it was really interesting in that sense.
And your process, Arunjay, to write the book, did you storyboard? How did you iterate? 3 years is a long time.
Yeah. So in the like the process I've followed is you do a brain dump. That's your draft one, and that's you just get everything out. So you start before that with kind of subheadings and chapters, and you do a rough layout. You can do that in a couple of hours, and then you just write. And I found this to be very helpful. I learned this in 2019. I was part of a group of 70 people writing a book, and we had this challenge to hit 1 million words, which for 70 people was that we needed to average about 15,000 words,
Wow.
and we got there. Mine was 12,000
Hmm.
as a first draft, and some people are 30. So it kind of averaged out. And in the end, half the cohort actually wrote a book and published it. The
Hmm.
other half didn't, kind of fell away. But the process of doing a brain dump and just writing and going to the next thing is amazing because you don't have writer's block.
Hmm.
You just keep going. like, and if you're stuck here, you go to the next thing, and then if you think of something else, you go back and add it, and then once you have that first draft, then you start to look at the gaps. And so that process for me, because I literally had to spend a year reading rather than writing, after
Mm,
I did the initial brain dump and saw how many gaps I had in this thing, which is far greater. In my first book, I had a few gaps, but nothing in comparison, because that was a topic, close to my heart. It's kind of like I knew a lot about it. Here, it was the opposite,
hmm,
and so the second, kind of like good 12 months was spent in just reading and accumulating that knowledge. As I was reading, I was also writing, but
mm,
not at any velocity, like, because I was just mostly filling gaps. And then I spent the third year really just rewriting it all to make it compelling and hook the reader. And, like, because you have all this, it becomes such a rich kind of body of work. But if you don't package it well, then, it doesn't land. And then the whole purpose is defeated.
hmm,
So, that was an interesting experience in kind of how you. So there, for that, I used there's a website called Story Grid, which is really it's an amazing resource, and they do the story arc. The great example is the Cinderella story. So you start out, and like then it goes like really down, and she's left out. She's not going to the ball. She's there, and then the fairy godmother comes, and then like it, and then you have again, like she's the midnight, and then losing
mm.
and then the happy ending. So the story arc
Interesting.
is what keeps you, is what hooks the reader. And there's obviously some great books, and they dissect a lot of them, and explain how those authors have done it. And then you just do your best to try to emulate that as best you can. I mean, I would like some writers are just purely gifted. They're so talented and they're able to write in a way that you're just, you're stuck on just turning every page. I wish I had that talent. Um,
Mm,
but keep working at it, and at least it gets better rather than kind of giving up. So yeah, I've enjoyed that process a lot. In fact, I'm actually writing my third book now, and I finished the second draft just the last few weeks, and it should be out later this year if all goes well. So yeah, I think once you get into it, then it could it's kind of really an interesting way of articulating your own thoughts, like,
mm,
because it forces you to think about your arguments, and like in a way that speaking just doesn't do,
mm.
um like it's like, so it's a really fascinating process. I would recommend to anyone, really.
Yeah, I kind of get that bug. Mark Twain has a great quote, Arunjay, when he was writing letters to his sister. He would say, I apologize. This letter is too long. I didn't have time to make it shorter. So, what was your editing process like? It was constantly kind of shaping it down.
Yeah. That's what that's, I think, kind of what I was saying in terms of forcing you to articulate something in a concise way, in a way that it carries all sides of the argument, because you want to be able to, um, really communicate succinctly what you're trying to say. And, that's what writing forces you to do. And in a especially if you want to kind of, you can write a blog and just post it without doing all that, but when you get to writing a book, and you go through that process, then it really does force you to. So like I said, when I spent the year rewriting it, like, I mean, that was a, like, with this very intention of making it really better for the reader.
Hmm. So if someone is stuck, Arunjay, in the, the wealth chasing loop,
Mhm.
how do you suggest for them to get out of them? What's your advice? Breaking free of that.
I mean, it's a everybody's situation is different.
Hmm.
It's there is no panacea. It's not something I can say, hey, do these three things, and you kind of be out of it. So I think it's really more a case of introspection, going deeper in kind of what do I want to achieve in life and why do I want to do achieve that. I think if you look at Maslow's pyramid of hierarchy, and like there are some things that we all need, you know, shelter, food, housing, or kind of like all these basic things. And so if you're chasing wealth and you haven't got these things, then it's just impossible to say, hey, dear, stop doing that.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
um although I feel like I've done this so much in my life that you chasing wealth, you shoot yourself in the foot.
Hmm.
So there's that too. um but I think for the most people who have all the basic amenities and everything, really asking yourself the question, what do I want? Like, because you just end up working for the sake of work. Is it like, are you working to live or are you living to work?
Hmm.
Like, I think that's, and I think there's also different seasons in our lives. So there is definitely a season for hard work, long hours, kind of earning your stripes. And because if you don't do that, then it's just, in the world we live in, others are going to get ahead of you, like. So there are, as much as it's not great, you have to play the game as strategically at some points in time. And then I think later you give yourself the luxury of choices. And that's when it becomes really interesting, because the question is, which path do you take at that point when you have those choices?
Hmm. One can get trapped in that loop, that's for sure, especially today in this kind of quick fix mentality. Everything you see social media where people supposedly are, becoming, getting wealthy quickly, and it can be a tough trap, that's for sure. Has there been anything in the last 30 days or so, month and a half or so, that you changed your mind on, Arunjay?
I think I don't know if it's been like last 30 days, but I find there's a lot of nuance in all of this. So, and I think it's deeply personal.
Hmm.
So this is not a black and white kind of thing.
Mm,
It's not like do this, don't do that, okay. And so what I find is that just making this, it's more of a kind of fine tuning that you know has I've noticed happening, as I find the balance in different ways. Um, for example, I find that I've I don't want to make millions, so but I that doesn't mean I'm not ambitious,
mm,
and therefore I still have ambitious goals, and I wonder, so in terms of finding a some sort of balance between family and work and these sort of things, there is still this kind of tension. And Cal Newport's book, The Slow Productivity, is something that I've been kind of trying to inculcate, because
mm,
um, there's work always expands to time available.
mm,
And so how do you kind of time box things, and be really efficient, and um, do what you want to do, yet also find that balance. So I find it's very interesting in life. Like, you have different ways to um, different challenges always coming up no matter what, and you then fall back on basically your past experience to navigate through that. So yeah, I think that's I found that really interesting.
Yeah, I think the ability to change one's mind and excuse me, Arunjay, to sometimes, especially in politics, we see these days people kind of dig in, and just the ability to change one's mind, given a different perspective, is always comforting and revealing to someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think, I've literally made a 180 turn in my thinking. And when I talk about the nuances, is just now finding, because it's not binary. And even
Mm,
now, I want to healthily think about, my current mindset and how that's serving me. And I think, we're on this great learning journey. So there's always something to learn from someone in how you can do something differently or better. And I think the moment you think you're right and you know it all, is you've lost the battle. Like, um, so I think, that's why, like, when you ask me what are the things, I'm not here to tell people this is what you need to do, because
mm,
we each need to figure that out for ourselves. But the message I want to spread is that, there is hope, we have agency, and if we apply our time and effort in the right areas, we can make big changes to our lives and to others and to the world. I think that's what I've learned.
mm,
So I don't really read the news, for example, like, and people tell me stuff all the time, so it's not like I don't know. Like, sadly yesterday the Pope passed away, and I didn't see that on a news website, but my wife told me. So
mm,
uh, I found out about it, and it's the same for, like, every major news thing that I need or should know about. Somebody or the other will tell me
mm,
in conversation. And I find, actually, this is such an interesting dynamic now, because when I talk to people and they're telling me things, I'm actually learning so much all the time,
mm,
because I didn't go out there and try to find that information myself. And I also, I'll be, oh, I didn't know actually, and tell me more or say more about that or something, like that creates a much more engaging conversation than, oh yeah, I heard about it, I read about it as well, like, okay. So, and I don't feel this need to know it all and prove that I'm on top of these different feeds and reading all this stuff. In fact, I don't scroll any feed on any social media at
mm.
all. And these are some of the choices I've made in the last few years to kind of come out of this hamster wheel that we can easily get sucked into. Um, so yeah, it's been uh, really kind of a lot of changes, but still willing to look at what I can do differently. I'm not, like, kind of heavily married to, certainly I've learned this works for me, and this is what I'm kind of committed to in terms of abundance mindset, and it's the life I live. But equally kind of open to that discussion and learning.
Yeah, and it's tough to get news because a lot of times it's, sponsors, biased, and if you get it from a friend, you get their perspective as well, which generally isn't biased. So that seems to be rewarding. And as I find as I get older, Runjay, I have more questions than I have answers,
Yeah,
and so part of the reason why I love having these conversations. And another point that you mentioned is that sometimes the trap of advice, sometimes friends or colleagues want advice, and I really try to steer away from advice. I say, well, here's what happened to me that's kind of similar to that situation, and here's what I learned. So, take from it what you will. So it could be a trap sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, and I've fallen into that trap a lot in the past. You want to be helpful, you want to help, and you want to, you know, and in that process, you could actually not help. You could be
Mm,
more unhelpful as a result. Like these are kind of unintended consequences, but uh, taking that step back and you know doing it the way you just described, to me, it makes a whole lot of sense. Um, and that's why I believe that we have the agency. And even in that one-to-one relationship, why take away the agency by saying do this?
mm,
Give them, say what you learned, or these are learnings, but leave the agency with them
mm.
to make the decisions that they need to make. And you know we're not always going to get it right, and that's okay. For the most part, that's okay. If it was just a matter of life and death, and someone, like if someone wanted to jump off, you're gonna grab them. You're not gonna be like, oh, here's the lessons I learned, and this is why you shouldn't jump off. Like
Mm.
in those moments, you're gonna take action. But those are very, they're the 1% of moments. The 99% is when we should leave the agency with people.
Want to show your love for discipline, inspiration, and the Joey Pinz podcast? Now's your chance. Introducing the brand new Joey Pinz merch store, where style meets discipline. Choose from premium apparel, cozy hoodies, stylish hats, durable bags, and your new favorite coffee mug, all featuring the iconic Joey Pinz logo. Perfect for podcast fans, discipline enthusiasts, or as unique gifts for friends and family. Every purchase supports the Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations podcast, helping us continue to inspire greatness and promote positive change. Visit joeypins.com/store today and wear your discipline proudly. Joey Pinz merch. Wear it, share it, and live it. And those are the opposite too. I try to separate from those people who want to constantly give advice, and then if you don't take it, they get upset. So there's that dynamic as well. So I started my business, Arunjay, in the 90s, and I was, a small tech firm in the States, in the Northeast, where I was just supporting, small business networks. And it's a very different technology landscape in the 90s and it is now. No World Wide Web, etc. Networking, you had to almost convince people that they needed a computer, and we I remember Bill Gates said, for Microsoft, a computer in every household, and people thought that was crazy. And of course, that's obviously not the case now. And I was working way too hard, 14-hour days, 16-hour days. I'm sure you're familiar to this, and putting my health and personal well-being in the back seat. And before you know it, I'm at the doctor's office, and she tells me I'm at 340 pounds, and just way overweight. And she says, if you don't lose this weight, you're not going to see your daughter graduate. So it scared the life out of me, Arunjay. And I'm driving home upset. What have I done now? I can abuse myself all I want, but now I have this daughter, I have this family, I have to stick around for them. So I spent the next 6, 7 months, changed all my health and dietary habits, and I lost about 130 pounds and kept it off. You can't look at it as a finishing line, right? These are lifelong changes. So when I tell this story, people say, what's your secret? What you do? And there's no secret, Arunjay. Discipline. That's how I lost it. That's how I kept it off. Willpower, focus, routine, all under what I think is the spectrum of discipline. I wonder how discipline plays a role in your life, Arunjay Katakam.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. So, Joey, firstly, congratulations on having gone through that journey. You know, it obviously was not easy on any level, and you've had to all the micro decisions in terms of the discipline, every time you're tempted to have something that you didn't
Mm.
want to, like, I can just imagine what it would have all been like. And I'm sure it's true even today, right? Like these things, cravings don't disappear. No matter, so um I think it is something that, you know we all kind of have to deal with. you know
Mm.
um in my case, I'm kind of like blessed in one sense. Um and I feel like I have, innately strong willpower. But it's interesting. My superpower in this case is not doing something. So if
Mm.
you tell me don't eat this, don't drink that, don't do the other, I can abstain much easily. But when you say, okay, now work out every day, you know like, to do that,
Mm.
I found it a huge challenge. And in the last 6 years now, I've been working out regularly. The only way I could do that, and it's still true today, was is have a trainer.
Hmm.
Like, now again, I'm fortunate, kind of privileged to be in that position. But if without that person there holding me accountable,
Mm.
I I would just find some reason why I don't need to work out today.
Hmm.
So what I've learned here is that, okay, these things I can do myself, and these things I need help and support to do. And the second category, I've tried to assemble the help and support, like put that in place to, help me achieve in the end my objectives, right? So that is what is the ultimate driver. So in your case, you wanted to see your daughter graduate. That's every time you sacrificed, and you used your willpower and your discipline. It was all that's the back of your mind. That's the driver as to why you were doing what you're doing. And then after some time, that becomes muscle memory.
Mm.
It's just part of you. You don't have to keep thinking about it, but you innately know why you're doing it. And I think that's now, we again, when I talk about this rise in consciousness, health consciousness is one of them. And we're like looking at, and there's a lot of podcasts, a lot of books, a lot of videos you can watch on how you can be healthy. And quite often people telling you the opposite things, which is the world we live in today. But nonetheless, taking action, again, it comes down to that agency, and actually taking action is the way to go. Even if it's not the perfect thing, and like, it's better than nothing. And now I know my workout regime is not great. I could be doing more, but equally I know it's better than zero. It used to be zero, and now, it's better. And I'm doing, like, so then you can build from there, but you have to get out of the blocks. And I think, like, James Clear, his book, Atomic Habits, is a great example of, how you could do these small things. And I think my favorite thing from his is habit stacking. And the thing you want to do and the thing you don't want to do, you put them
Mm.
together and do the thing you don't want to do first, and reward yourself with the thing you want to do. And I use that a lot in my life. Even in work, the email I want to send and the email I don't want to send.
Mm. Mm.
Do the one you don't want to do first, then do the one you want to do. Like, so yeah. So some of these hacks are, helpful, but in the end, it'll come back down to why you want to do what you want to do. Um,
What motivates you, Arunjay?
yeah, that's a great question. Um, yeah, I think where I am now is I'm like really content, to the point that if I got hit by a bus, I I'm fine with it.
Mm.
And I have young kids, and I certainly want to see them graduate and beyond. But if something happens, like, it's not in my control, it's not. And so a key motivation from a health perspective is to, I don't know how long I'm going to live, but I want to be healthy as much as, for that time. So that I would say, is kind of one motivation. And then the second is around, just we are born into the families, we're born into, I call it the postcode lottery. And, it's not like I was born into a super affluent family, but equally, I got certainly a lot of privilege. And now I think of it like, even though, my parents and like not wealthy and that sort of thing, I did get a lot of social capital from them,
Hmm.
which is a form of wealth which is very underappreciated or undervalued. So all of these things I feel so grateful for.
Hmm.
And so the question I ask myself and all of the work I'm doing with the Inclusive Action Lab and the different projects is, what can I do to benefit others?
Hmm.
And that's kind of also the mission on solving poverty, because like we shouldn't live in a world with poverty. Like there's no reason to. We have so much resource, so much wealth, so much rich. Like humans, we're human. We're all human. Like one human life is not better than another. So I think, on a very macro level, that's kind of. But what motivates me is this level, is this gratitude of all that I got, and what can I do with it.
So, given that motivation, you mentioned gratitude, contentment, impact. How do you measure success, Arunjay?
I don't.
At all?
I mean, if I did try to, I would just be replacing chasing millions to chasing something else.
Hmm.
Like what, I mean, there's little point. I do the best I can when, in the present moment. Um, you know, Even though they're non-profit startups, we still want them to succeed. So, there is some planning, some strategy, some metrics on some level. But ultimately, I'm not thinking of this. I must do this. I must achieve that. Like those things are never ending, never, like mirages in a desert. You can just go after them for forever. And I guess at a place where I don't think that would serve me well.
Hmm. Yeah, fascinating perspective. Arunjay, I was so glad when we set this up. I love what you're doing. I love your story. I love how you're helping others. I really, really, really wish you well. And thank you so much for your time today. Anybody listening or watching, how can they get in touch with you and get the book?
Yeah, so the book is available on Amazon.
But you don't want.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
So it's also available on my website. So arunjay.com would be the best place to get it. And the second best place is Amazon for those, who are entrenched in that network. And you know, what I realized, like I didn't want to list my book on Amazon. And my publisher said, look, don't put your book on an island that no one's going to find.
Right. Right.
So
Unfortunately. Yeah.
you kind of have to work with some of the things that exist. And I talk a lot about in the book that we in 2021, my wife and I came off Amazon Prime, and I sold my shares in Amazon, and like I don't believe in it. Like, so in fact, I hardly use it at all. But when I do, I use it as a search engine for a product, and
Ah,
then I take the product that it served me and put it in Google to find someone else selling it. And I'm happy to pay more for it just so that, I don't kind of put more energy in and, kind of money and all of that. That's the voting I talk about, the votes
right.
we can use with our
Not a
money.
fan. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. And the best way to connect, so either through my website, just people can email me, or LinkedIn is the other platform that I kind of would use. So that there would be the two ways.
Arunjay, You're
Yeah.
also on Twitter. You're on LinkedIn, as you mentioned. You also have a Substack,
Oh yes.
Arunjay,
Yeah,
Substack,
yeah, yeah.
and Instagram as well. Yeah. Arunjay, thank you so much for your time. Next time I'm in your neighborhood there in the United Kingdom, perhaps we'll get a cup of tea.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Joey, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Such a fascinating conversation. And yeah, I really appreciate it.
You be well. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations.